All right, I've actually made an attempt at this video a couple times of this today, and I never really got where I wanted to get. Turn that down a little bit. And I've been thinking about this since last night, and a lot of it has to do with essentially what do we do about this Portland situation and essentially about these communist insurgents. We can't just let them ignore it. The problem will spread. But if we go in there, optically, you lose. They want the bloodbath. They want basically the images of troops marching in or militia members marching in and people getting hurt, because that really helps them spread their propaganda. It helps the DNC. That's why, even though somebody like Ted Wheeler, the Antifa people who are there want him to resign, and they're destroying his city and making, I'm sure, his life very uncomfortable, he wants to keep. Basically, he wants the Democrats to keep power, so he's going to basically stick his fingers in his ears and close his eyes until, it becomes basically Trump's fault. They're trying to do that. Like Biden's speech today was ridiculous. Wheeler's speech, I guess, was that yesterday or this morning, basically saying, blaming all the violence on Trump. And it's like, no, these are left-wing communist groups. And the Democrat mayors and governors are the ones who aren't doing anything about it and are stopping the feds from coming in to actually clean it up. They're the one, the Democrats are the ones who are handcuffing the police, cutting the funding, telling them, pretending like it's not going on. We know this. And they've been pretending like that for over, I guess, almost about 3 months now. And now that public opinion has turned against them. Now they're saying, okay, the riots are real, but they're Donald Trump's fault. We've always been against violence. They're full of crap. They're full of crap. And a lot of moderates are buying into it. Now, what they're hoping is basically they want to get this bloodbath going in Portland, where the big fight's going to be, right? The enemy fortress. Because then they can claim victim. They can say, oh my God, look at this. Look how this was handled by the feds. I mean, forget the fact that it's the state government's fault and the city government's fault that this even got to this point in the first place. They want basically the painful consequences to fall on Donald Trump. Basically, the sacrifice being, the sacrifices made to go in and uproot these communists politically are supposed to, help the Democrats. That's the idea. That's what they're going for. That's why they're pushing the whole lie about it being like right-wing militias and stuff and agitators. Some people do buy that, but those people are usually already like full TDS and they're voting for Biden anyway. They're looking to get basically the people in the middle that they've largely lost. They're either trying to win them back, or they're trying to basically get people who have never voted for or who aren't paying attention, but have such a huge event and basically have such a huge propaganda campaign that these people feel that, oh my God, evil Trump, Cheeto Hitler, he's actually like a real thing and hurting these people, and then I must go out and must vote for the Democrat, of course, right? That's their strategy. That's what they've resorted to. It's pretty obvious to see that kind of pivot. So the question is then, what do you do, right? This can't go on forever. We can't just let basically Portland be essentially an autonomous city where there's, communists running amok and get funding and essentially acting as an insurgency, arming up in a lot of these cases. I mean, lots of guns, lots of body armor, like they're actually militarizing really fast to like a scary degree. And the thought is, okay, if we can't send in National Guard, or I should say we can't send in federal troops, and we can't send in the National Guard unless we federalize them, and we have to invoke the Insurrection Act. Like, you think that Ukraine phone call was something the Democrats are going to try to impeach the president over? Wait till he invokes the Insurrection Act. They'll come out of their vacation that they can't give they can't unlock us down or pay people a couple bucks to so they can get groceries, but the president does something like invoke the Insurrection Act, you bet your ass they're going to come out. They're immediately going to try to impeach him, and they're going to make a shitstorm out of it. And one of the things that's going to back them up is that there's going to be fighting, and there will be bloody exchange, because cleaning up this kind of mess is not pretty. So people on the right will probably cheer. They'll say, yeah, finally these commies are getting pushed out. I don't care that they're I don't care if they're getting curb stomped by the National Guard. It's about time. And I understand that, but optically you got to remember, the point is not to win the battle. The point is to win the optics war. That's what they want. It's not unlike Tet, and it's not unlike actually what the South did towards the end of the Civil War. So I'm going to try to tell you kind of as concise as I can that could be, how concise that can be, right? What the situation was towards the end of the Civil War that essentially led to it actually ending where the South was destroyed. The Confederacy was destroyed, and they completely capitulated to the North. So, basically, Lee realized, and the Confederates realized, basically, once, particularly after Gettysburg, and just the fact that they advanced into Pennsylvania, and the North actually got their shit together and had enough of forces to push them back. They weren't ever really able to take Washington, D.C. They weren't able to put enough pressure around D.C. to unfortify it. They never. It wasn't going to work out. They weren't going to basically be able to capture any territory that would be valuable enough to the North to bring the North to the negotiating table. Okay, fine. But what they can do is win the optics war. By the end of the Civil War, basically, people are war weary of that. You got to remember, the Democratic Party existed in the North. They were the minority, but their whole stance, their political stance, particularly the guy who ran against Lincoln, for example, during the election, was, look, just let the Confederacy go. Let's at least negotiate with them. Maybe we'll let them keep their slaves, or just negotiate to end the fight, right? Because it's not worth doing this. They're fellow Americans. They're Democrats, right? And they don't. And they want essentially the North to back off. And the general public in general wanted the Confederacy to be destroyed, but they weren't willing to pay. For all cost, they must be destroyed. It wasn't like a religious fanaticism, like where they're just going to keep fighting and fighting and fighting until every last Confederate is dead. Like that's not what they wanted. They just wanted the fighting to stop. Oh, please end the war. Please do this fast. I thought, Lincoln, I thought you were going to send troops in to do this, and then they were going to stop the fighting, and then the South would surrender, and they didn't. They just want the war to end. They're getting war weary. Lee knows this. And he's going to fully exploit this. So what he does is basically he's told, all right, you have to protect Richmond. And Richmond's the capital. It's pretty far north, but it is the capital of the Confederacy. They've got the command and control. Their president's there. And Lee's main force is based out of Richmond. So he moves his large, experienced, very good army into Richmond and basically says, come at me, bro. Now, Grant doesn't take the bait. Grant, Lincoln, and Sherman, really. They don't take the bait. They say, okay, they're leading us into a fight that is, we think we can win. We probably have the forces to win, but, excuse me, but it's going to be either one hell of a siege or just a bloodbath. And it's gonna make it work. It's gonna make the public think that this war is not worth it. 200,000 more dead northern boys to so that the South don't have their slaves. That's kind of a tough argument when you've already lost hundreds of thousands of people, and you've seen the devastation and destruction. We don't have cameras now. They didn't have cameras back then. We have cameras now where you can see things up front. But, the papers are going to record, if a city's burned to the ground. And people notice when their neighbors are getting visits from military officers because their sons are dead from the fighting. People get war weary. That's part of the strategy. And you don't have to win a fight with the North if you're the South. Although they tried to do that. They tried to basically defeat the Union, and then they could just do whatever they wanted. Obviously, that didn't work out. But that wasn't the only way to win. The way to win was to not lose. Basically, force the North to never really be able to push hard enough with enough forces to be able to destroy you, and really basically force you to surrender. That's all they need to do, is just not be forced to surrender. So they're holding the line, and he's setting this trap in Richmond. And Grant says, "All right, we got to make him think we're taking the bait, but we can't take this bait." So he sends his forces around. The large majority of the Union force, in terms of offensive capabilities, they march towards Richmond, but they don't go into Richmond. They go around Richmond. They start, building pontoon bridges and all kinds of stuff. And then the South, the Lee is scrambling his forces to all directions to meet this large Union force that's supposed to be marching on Richmond. He never does it. Surrounds them, causes problems for them. Basically forces Lee to have half his forces on one side, half his forces on the other. Completely exploits the fact that basically he's kind of it's like a king sitting in chess, and you have like two rooks defending it, right? And the attacker has two bishops to attack it. Now he could just go in and go after the rooks one by one, but that's not what he does. He moves and he keeps putting the king in check, forcing this rook to move around, and instead of basically going out and destroying you, it has to now block to protect the king. It's a similar kind of situation. And you think, okay, well, yeah, but that's going to drag the war out. How do you win at that point? Well, that's where Sherman comes in. Sherman takes his forces pretty far west because the concern was essentially that the Confederate would be able to basically retreat west, regroup, rearm, and then come back in terms of like a military force. Sherman starts west, and he goes south. And he goes south pretty much, pretty much through Georgia. I think he went a little further than that even. He destroys every small force he comes across. Small militias, small Confederate force, stuff that's like an easy victory, or it's like 5-1, 6-1, 10-1. He just moves in, he just steamrolls them. He destroys the rail lines. He destroys the supply. He burns the crops. He burns the munitions depots. They blow up the trains. They devastate as they move along. And every time they do this, the South goes, oh, we really want to send our forces out to go meet this guy, but that's where they want to fight. They want to fight in the fields. They want to fight basically in the open where we have a disadvantage. Sherman comes across a fort that's, stacked with, thousands of Confederate soldiers, and it's going to take months to siege it, and they can take it. And, oh, look how many Confederates you can take out by taking that fort. Sherman just goes, nah, not going to do that. Moves on. And now that fort is stuck there, and they're saying, well, do we give up the fort and go chase after him and risk getting destroyed out in the open, or do we stay here? Like, they don't know what to do. And different Confederate commanders make different decisions. They all end up being the wrong decision. And Sherman's just smashing them one after another. I mean, he gets the Confederates to come out of Atlanta, basically to come out of Atlanta. He destroys the force that's defending Atlanta, and now he's got a city, basically, that he just burns to the ground. The Confederates are getting their asses kicked, and it's Sherman who's just causing all kinds of crazy stuff behind the line because the Confederates have to hold on to their territory to win, but they can't chase Sherman, and they can't move their force away from Richmond to do this. Sherman takes it all the way to the sea. The forces in Richmond, they're demoralized because, their homes are burning down. They're out of supply, they're out of morale, and they just kind of disintegrate. They try to make a break for it. And Grant's army stops them from one side, and then I forget who the hell the other general was, basically, who was now positioned west. He cuts them off, and pretty much he says, all right, Lee, your army's got to surrender now. They're out of supply, they're out of morale, we've routed them completely. You didn't even have a way you could organize escape, and we have your capital. Your president fled to New Orleans, but you guys have lost. You've lost your military force, and now we can just march down piece by piece, and we will besiege these cities, and we will besiege these forts, and it's going to be absolutely ridiculously painful for the South. Lee, of course, knows when he's beat, so he surrenders. He says, "All right, it's over. Let's at least negotiate on the North's terms," and he agrees to them. And the Confederacy collapses. It died right there. Once Lee's army in Virginia was destroyed, that was it. The Confederacy lost all potency because the Feds, the Union, the North, was going to be able to roll in and just, it didn't matter. The enemy capital fell. That's a huge victory. You think support for the war went down after the enemy capital fell? Hell no. It's like in Iraq in 2004, you might have been opposed to the war, but it was pretty popular when we took Baghdad in like a week. Everybody was like, wow, this is going great. It's a huge morale boost. And you suddenly start forgetting what that quagmire is when, your son's writing a note to you saying, hey, we won this battle and we did this and we routed the Confederates and this is going to be over any day now because they're losing. They lost the optics war. They shattered the South's morale, and the South basically wasn't able to manipulate the public in the North into thinking that basically the war was either unwinnable or not worth what we're going to have to pay to defeat the Confederacy. Why does that remind me of Portland? Well, if you haven't noticed already, that explains a very similar situation to what's happening with Portland. He doesn't, Lee's army is not there. There's not like a military force necessarily holding Portland. I mean, they are kind of a military force, but it's not like, they've got tanks and jets, and it's not like a concentration of regular military forces the way Lee would have had if they had tanks and jets, but you know what I mean. So they want to fight there. They just like how Lee and the Confederacy, they wanted that really bloody battle for Richmond. They wanted to preoccupy the North with that. That is to get the optics win, to get the war weariness win, to get the, oh my God, the violence is terrible, isn't it terrible? We should all talk about this. Here's our terms of you guys stopping attacking us. That's what they want in Portland. That's what they want from the basically the North, the Union, the MAGA people, the the right wing militia, especially just people with AR-15s and pickup trucks who are sick of this. The National Guard for Trump. They want the political optics victory of a bloody street to street fight in Portland. Trump keeps threatening. He keeps moving forces around. He keeps National Guard in the other states are doing stuff. The nearby states, they're ready to march in. They're sending investigators. For a while there, they were holding the courthouse, and then they left eventually. They keep basically making it so, where's the fight going to be? Oh, it's going to be in Portland. And Antifa just keeps, sending their forces back and forth out to other cities and back to Portland and out to other, cities back to Seattle. So they're concentrating in the Pacific Northwest area. But Trump's winning the optics war. And we know this because of the way the Democrats' rhetoric has shifted. But Chad Wolf, the now director of Homeland Security, he was acting director before because they didn't know. I forget what happened to the last guy, but he's fully in charge now. He's Sherman. He is Donald Trump's Sherman. Because while Trump basically feigns the idea that he's going to march with the Insurrection Act on Portland or Seattle or one of these places that are going to be really, really hard to, basically optically very difficult to clean up. Not tactically, but optically. Really easily spun in the favor of these communists. Because the media will do that, and the Democrats will do that. Chad Wolf is going into places like Kenosha, where the governor, the right won the optics war in Kenosha because the devastation was so bad, so fast, and the shooting victim, the guy that triggered it, it wasn't justified at all. Like he had a knife and he got shot, and it wasn't at all what people were saying it was. And moderates very quickly picked up, and they were like, "Yeah, we don't like how the Democrats are handling this. It seems like it's total crap." Basically, they're allowing these. They're not sending their police or National Guard in to stop these people from coming in out of state, rioting, looting, destroying, and burning the town down. So they let the National Guard in. Well, National Guard goes in with federal forces, U.S. Marshals. I'm sure Bortak was part of it as well. They arrest 107 Antifa members, majority of which I think was actually more than that. It was like 130 something, and then like 100 or so something were from Seattle, Portland, like outside of the state. Whoa, okay. They got a big chunk of the organization. Could Antifa afford to lose those people? Maybe. But now they've lost the optics war because now they've lost basically 100-something people who are now arrested by the feds, which means these DAs can't touch them. The DAs that keep releasing them, like the DA in Portland, DA in Philly. And basically that fight optically has been won by Donald Trump because he basically has a prime example of, hey, you let the feds do our job. Even if you don't want to do your job, you at least let us do the job. We'll put the violence to an end. Was it Milwaukee or was it Minneapolis? It was Minneapolis. There was, I think it was one of those. Like one of those. Basically, a dude had killed himself. It was basically a murder suspect, I think it was, and the police were chasing him. And there's video. The dude just points a gun in his head and blows his head off. Somebody says the cops killed him. That wasn't true at all. There was video evidence of showing the contrary. Didn't matter. All the people rioted, started burning things down, and then they said, "Oh my God!" and they called the feds and they put it down. That was an optical win for Donald Trump because it's a clear-cut example of these people are ridiculous and they're burning down these cities, and if these Democratic mayors and governors would do their goddamn jobs, we'll even help them do their job, then this won't be a problem anymore. Chad Wolf's basically undermining their command and control, undermining their expansions to different cities. They're catching people, like buses of people being stopped going into certain places. Our Homeland Security is routing these guys. They're just as mobile, if not more mobile, than Antifa is. They're moving around with their armored vehicles and their stuff, and they're linking up with the National Guards to operate. They've got federal facilities all over the country, so it's not that hard to basically say, hey, marshals in this state, arm up, we're going to go this, we're going to stop some vehicles, and we're going to grab some Antifa people, and we're going to put this insurgency down. They're winning all these little small battles that don't make the news, they don't make the optics, they're not something that the Democrats can spin necessarily to take advantage of, particularly when the shots aren't fired, because they basically ambush them, for lack of a better term, when they're not ready, like they're all on the bus smoking pot, and then all of a sudden the marshals show up and they blow out the tires, and then they just start pulling people out. They don't stand a chance at that point. Nobody dies, but you also don't hear about that because the cameras aren't rolling, the media's not there, the city's not on fire for the media to pretend that it's fire, even though it's a peaceful protest. He's gutting them. He's destroying their supply line. He's destroying their support optically. He's destroying their their resources, their ability to expand, their ability to communicate and push their propaganda in different cities. That's what Chad Wolf's doing. He's picking all the soft targets, and he's putting the full might of the Department of Homeland Security on these soft targets. And he's backed up by the feds. And, even some of the states don't like what he's doing, but he's doing everything he can to make it basically as hard as possible for Antifa to operate outside of the places they've already burned down. And he's fighting the optics war. All Trump has to do is threaten to send these forces in and threaten to act the Insurrection Act. And it seems like the Antifa people and the Democrats are buying it. They really think they can goat him into doing this. And he might ultimately have to end up doing it, depending on how bad the situation is behind the scenes. But they're trying to goat him to make this maneuver, and he's acting like he's going to do it. In the meantime, he's completely slitting their throats from the back by having Chad Wolf operate with basically DHS to go take out all these little terror cells. They're tracking the foreign money. They're tracking the people who are supplying, Act Blue is funding these people a lot. Like, there's lots of cases being built. And as the public learns more and more and more, and they see, oh, my town's safer since the National Guard rolled in, or basically this started and then the feds came in and they stopped it immediately, that is a really good optics look for the president. And it's the opposite of what the Democrats are trying to achieve. They want stuff to burn down so that they can say, hey, look how horrible things are, elect us and we can make it stop. These people won't be so mad. And it's a really tough sell to Americans who are already fiercely stubborn and independent, But that's kind of what I see going on. And I think the strategy is going to be basically let Department of Homeland Security do what they need to do. Operate full steam, full force. Screw Portland. Go ahead. Film Portland and keep saying that this is somehow Trump's fault. And Trump every day can say, well, we were going to send National Guard and federal forces in, but the states don't want to let us do that. You basically remove your mayor or recall your governor, and so we can come in legally and actually put this down. Maybe that'll work. Maybe Antifa will collapse from the outside in, and will actually, basically, they might just get routed. They might have to leave Portland because they're not getting the support they're getting anymore from the outside. At which point they get routed. It's not unlike Lee's army in Richmond. You demoralize them. If every time they send out a bus to another town full of people to start a riot, the feds are intercepting them and throwing them in jail, these people aren't coming back, and they're actually being arrested federally, that's going to have a demoralizing effect on basically the communist forces that are holding Portland. There's more than one way to win, and you don't have to take on the enemy head on. In fact, you really should never take the enemy head on. If it's a fair fight, that's not a fight you want to be involved with. You always want to exploit where your strengths are and exploit the enemy's weaknesses and keep pushing until they have to do something. You want to force, even if it's something that's unpleasant, you want to always force your opponent to be making the moves, because you can force them to do something that means you have control of the situation. When this all started, they had the control of the situation because they were starting the fight, they were starting the fires, they were the ones who were basically forcing the feds to react to protect these courthouses, to protect life and liberty. They were forcing the hand of these police agencies to get into violent clashes with these people so that they could, film, somebody getting their ass kicked with a nightstick and say, "Oh my God, police brutality." They were forcing basically responses. That's not the case anymore because they've overplayed their hand. Now it's basically DHS's turn to force the communists to do something. Just like they forced Lee to leave, basically retreat out of Richmond, forced them to leave their little strongholds in the South, but basically Sherman just going rampant, hitting all the soft targets really hard. It's the same deal going on, but it's on a more of a law enforcement level. We'll see what happens. That's the strategy I see in play right now. I could be wrong. I mean, tomorrow Trump could drop 101st Airborne on top of Portland for all I know. Which optically, how's that going to look? I don't know. I don't think that's going to be good. I think the Democrats will probably scream and screech. Then again, they're going to scream and screech no matter what happens. But there's a lot more in play. The rhetoric and the optics, that's what you got to watch. You got to watch what are the optics of this? How is the media covering it? How are the public reacting to it? Because if you don't win the hearts and minds of the public and the moderates, it doesn't matter how successful you are militarily, you're going to lose. If the United States has said, you know what, screw New Zealand, we're going to attack New Zealand, and we attacked New Zealand and we destroyed them because they suck, right? Awesome, right? It went really well, but the public wouldn't be happy with you go destroying New Zealand, right? So what happens? New Zealand just has to basically not get wiped out, and they're going to win because the U.S. public's going to either get sick of it or they're going to push out the leaders who are doing that. That's how it works in democracies. In theocracies or dictatorships, it's a lot different than that. Um, but you got to remember there are basically there's a grander strategy in play other than what you're just seeing play out on your TV screen in front of you, and you got to think ahead. I hope at least Chad Wolf and DHS and Trump's people are thinking ahead of these communists, and they're basically intelligence is what they need at the moment, and they seem to be for the most part finally catching up to be kind of one step ahead of where they are. I don't think the Antifa expected essentially the federal forces to roll in as hard and fast as they did in Kenosha, or like not either one. There would have been more fighting and more bodies, and two, they wouldn't have lost. They wouldn't have had their basically what was it the riot kitchen and the other basically 100 and something members of Antifa uniformed being picked up. They would have never made that sacrifice to try to hold Kenosha, basically keep Kenosha in disarray. They wouldn't have done that. That was not a trade they wanted to make, and it caught them by surprise. That's why you see the saber rattling in Portland, basically come and get us, because that's where they want the fight. That's where they want the fight. So, all right. I know this video was kind of long, but I think hopefully it'll help some people watching this think a little more strategically about what's going on and what the objectives of basically the parties involved are. It's the optics. It's the optics. It's the optics. It's the optics. You don't win with the optics. It doesn't matter if you win with the tactics. We could have nuked Iraq, right? Just tactically we would have won the war in 2 seconds, right? We could have nuked Vietnam, but what would have happened with the optics? You would have lost, and you got to think about that. There's more to war than just crushing the enemy like you do in an RTS game. There's a lot more going on, and you gotta play the game, because if you're not playing the game, then the people who are playing the game are going to be able to exploit you. In this case, the Democrats are exploiting the violence, but Trump is fighting back. It seems like they're making some very sound decisions that are basically keeping the public reminded that, hey, the left are the ones doing this, and we want to put an end to it, but our hands are being tied by these governors and mayors. Like, what do you want us to do? And then in the meantime, they're actually going and grabbing people that are bad. So pay attention to the tactics. And I'm kind of interested to see what's happening, especially with the public opinion shifting so dramatically, so quickly. I've never seen a shift that fast between weeks of polling than what I just witnessed with the Democrats after their convention and then after the RNC. Because not only did Biden not get his boost, basically the riot stuff became so unpopular. So it was like a double whammy. So like Trump, they're estimating, is at 30-something+ % approval within the black community alone. That might actually be higher than that. If that's actually true and that holds through to November, game over for the Democrats. And the only hope the Democrats have is that essentially there's some sort of bloody fight or disaster they can then blame on the president. So that's why they want to draw them into Portland. They said they want to have this. They want to use basically Portland as the sacrificed pawn that is so painful for basically America to retake, that they can get some of these people who weren't paying attention and say, you know what, I just don't like the fighting period, so I'm going to vote for the person who says that they can make the fighting stop. Not that they're going to go fight the bad guys, but that they're just going to make the fighting stop. That's what happens. That's how the fights go down. So, all right, catch you later.